So we just talked a lot about why you should have an action plan, some of the sort of benefits and the things that you might want to consider in terms of setting this up from a we should use action plans perspective. But what should
Yeah.
it actually look like once you've got to that point and you want to create your first action plan? Like, what does an action plan actually look like? And how do you go about building that for your own customers?
Yeah. Let me share my screen. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and pull up an Arrows action plan. So
Of course.
I have a number of these, and we use different plans for different types of customers, different segments. We use them internally, we use them externally. But the idea behind this specific plan, this is one of the more simple ones, but this is for customers of ours who are wanting to use our product, get in and build their first action. And the biggest piece of advice I have here, if you take nothing away from this call, it's take this away. Take your own bias out of building these mutual action plans. You are in your tool often. You are working with your product teams. You are working with your design teams. Things that seem super intuitive or easy to you might not necessarily be true to everyone else you're working with. And a good way to put that into action is take someone who doesn't know your product, or take someone from your internal teams even who maybe isn't as close to that customer journey or the product itself, and walk them through an onboarding process. Let them ask you questions. All of those things should be documented and then laid out. And then you can determine, are these at the right time? Are they for the right type of segment, and so on? But the point there is to remove any sort of bias that you might have that your customers might not be aware of. And to be candid, I had to do this process even at Arrows a number of times, because I had been in the product and I thought, this is super easy. Customers will absolutely understand this. And it turned out they were getting stuck in those moments. And I used the dashboards and the plans to see where that kept happening and then going back and optimizing. But at its simplest form, this plan is intended to get a customer up and running with Arrows, and getting them through that initial first month is what these 5 phases that I'll unpack here in a second do. On the left-hand side here, I've tried to lay out a little bit of that journey. And so setting some high-level goals, I go in and adjust these and make them more specific to a customer once I get a chance to do discovery and talk with them. But at the highest level, what I'm trying to communicate here is that this is your Arrows onboarding plan. Over the next 4 weeks, which is what these 5 phases here correlate to, we're going to get you into Arrows, we're going to review your process, and we're going to get you comfortable to the point of building your first template and getting that out to your first customer. In my world, those are the first 2 aha moments I need someone to realize. To get there, there's a few steps which I'll unpack. From there, what I'm saying is after this onboarding, we're going to spend the next 6 months together every month or so with a check-in. So this sets some level of expectation and transparency that you're not going to be lost and left on your own after we're done with these first 4 weeks. I am going to be here. The team's going to be here to support you, but let's get you through this first 4 weeks and we'll go from there. And then part of the action plan is obviously assigning who is responsible for what, internally, externally, what progress is being made, all this stuff updates as you go. And again, that's just to communicate, even when we don't physically have a chance to talk, that things are in line, we're making progress, here's where we're stuck, here's who's responsible. Now, if I go and unpack some of these phases, and this is one of my biases that I had to learn myself, I was trying to push people straight into Arrows to set up their payments and access Arrows and get there. But I realized before that, what I actually need to do is learn a little bit about your process. And to do that, if I don't have a chance to talk with you yet, I would love for you to send me your documents. So in this first phase here, what I'm saying is send over your current onboarding documents, whether that's your Google Sheets or Excel spreadsheets or wherever you're storing that information, and upload it to me. From there, let's schedule that kickoff call. And all these action buttons point to different places. If I open this one, it goes to a Dropbox where you can actually upload those files. If I have you click this, it'll let you go to my calendar and schedule your first kickoff call. I'm unpacking an example here to talk through my logic. But I realized that if I can actually see a little bit of your process, and if you're willing to share some of that ahead of our first call, I can far better help you and understand your internal workings so that we can then translate that into an action plan. So you send over your documents, you schedule that first call. Now, between now and that call, I have an opportunity to go review those documents. You can see here, this is a task that I've set visible to me only, because I don't necessarily need customers to know that I'm doing this, but it'll let them know that on my end, I'm doing something and they are done with this part of the phase. And a part of our action plan here is you can tick these things off as you do them. So you communicate to your customers. And what I do is I pull this up on our first call together and I say, as we go through this plan, mark off pieces that you're completing so that I'm aware of what's happening and you're aware of what's happening. And if I come and mark this last piece off after I've had a chance to review, my customer will now know this phase is done. You can see the progress being made here, and we're on to the next thing. And in their world, this will expand this next phase, and they'll see what it's going to look like to actually access arrows. I'll go a little bit quicker through these next phases, but you can kind of catch the drift here. It's moving them through to get them to that first template creation. You can't do that in our tool, the way it's set up, until you pay for the account. So the first thing I'm putting out here is pay for arrows. And that might feel direct and that might feel a little uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, we're both running businesses, right? So what you want to do is make sure that you are setting both sides up for success. And I know that we can't move on until we're paid, and customers can't access the tool until they complete their invoice. So that's the first thing that's front and center here. Once you've done that, go ahead and access the account. This is a link back to arrows. At this point, you'll have received your login information. From there, invite your team members. If your model charges by seats, for example, you want people to fill those seats in your product. That's why I have this step here. This might seem like it's out of place, or it might seem so intuitive. Of course, customers will go share their invites and get their teams, but you'd be surprised how many people don't do this. And then you're stuck with a customer who is paying for maybe 5 seats, but only using 2 of them. And they forgot that they need to invite team members. So that is value lost to that customer. So what I want you to do is pay for arrows, get into your account yourself, invite the rest of your team. And then I'm putting this out here, and not necessarily every one of our customers uses our automated integrations, but I want you to know that they exist. What this does is it sparks conversation, at least for the next time we chat, to say, if they've ticked this off, I'll know that they are using a CRM that we integrate with. If they don't tick this off, it's an opportunity for me to go back and ask, are you using a certain CRM? Would it make sense to automate some of that? Should we talk about our options? If yes, great. If no, maybe I move this into a future phase. And this is one of those pieces that isn't necessarily the biggest value realization point today in this journey. So in time, I might end up moving this to a different phase or to a different plan altogether, but I'm leaving this here so I can learn, are customers engaging with this? Are they understanding this? And so on. One thing that you don't see in here, but you can, obviously, as you assign these templates out, do is add due dates, is assign people who are responsible, whether that's you internally, whether that's customer, whether that's the people in their teams that they are working with. This is all, again, to communicate who is responsible for it, when they are responsible for it by, and any sort of additional commentary that we want to add. So I got you to send over your documents. You now are in Arrows and you understand the basic setup functionality that comes with it. Next thing I need you to do is build your template. That seems like a leap from here to here. This is obviously why we have that call scheduled. During that call, we talk about what is a template building look like. I open a template with them. If I have your documents, we can walk through some of that together. But I want you to come in and build your first version of this plan. If you do that, you have reached, in my mind, that first aha moment to get you to the point of being able to actually see the value of Arrows, which is putting a plan in front of your customer and driving them to completing that plan. Driving them to completing that plan drives them towards their goals. That's what we've outlined here, right? So it is not intended to be pushy or be naggy. It's more so intended to remind customers what we signed up for initially and how do we get you there. So let's set up your first template. Let's schedule a template review call. I like to do this right when I'm doing that call. From there, let's send out your first plan. Ideally, what happens after we schedule that review call is you go and optimize some of those things. You change the pieces we talked about. You get comfortable at least to get that first plan out there, and then you send it out. Here, I've attached some supplementary resources. A question we get often asked is, how do I actually introduce this plan in the first place? So try to alleviate some of those pain points and questions for your customers by providing content or resources that does that. So in our case, what we did was draft up a couple easy templates that you can copy and paste and throw in an email to introduce the idea of this plan. I noticed customers were getting stuck on, how do I communicate to my customers how to use this plan? That's why we added this phase in here. If you want to send your first plan out, but you're a little bit stuck, use these templates and get it going. From there, we can assume you set up your first template. We reviewed it together. We have some time to review future edits, and then schedule that call to tell me how it's going. How was that first experience getting you to build your template, send the template? Do you have feedback on the UI? Do you have feedback on how your customers received it? I want to hear that, right? So that's my action, is to schedule another call with me. If you don't do this, it's an indicator for me to reach out or email you and at least ask what's going on, where did you get stuck, what happened? And then lastly, I want you to know this isn't over. That's why we have this 6-month piece laid out here. So the last step seems basic, but it's to remind you that this thing isn't over and there is more to come here. And in month 2, we'll check in again. And I'm putting this onus on me at this stage because as far as the customer is concerned, they've done their bits, but I will check back in with you in month 2. And that could look in the form as an email. That can be another phase here. That can be a whole separate plan. But I want to remind you that this isn't done. I'm not leaving you here just because you sent your first template and you're quote unquote done with onboarding, but we'll be continuing to check in and go from there. So if I get a customer through these 5 phases, I know they're done with what I consider onboarding, at least for that first month. And now I have an opportunity. This is that binary yes. Now I get to really dig into how many templates did they create? How many customers did they send it to? So on and so forth.
So this is such a great overview of a mutual action plan in practice. Everything laid out from the goals to what you're responsible for, what the customer is responsible for. And I think importantly, you know, what are the dependencies that I have to do to help the customer get to the next step? And what are the things that have to happen for the customer to be able to move forward in this plan? You have that shared understanding together. And maybe we can do another session on how do you come back to this when maybe we look at a completed plan or a partially completed plan and look at what are the things that you would look at when you're diving in to optimize and improve. And also, importantly, as teams are scaling their customer onboarding, how do you report on the performance of plans and report on your ability to make customers successful?
Yeah. And that's exactly it. You nailed it. Like when you have one of these, then you can figure out where do you optimize? Where do we scale? Where do we need more steps? Where do we need less steps? But you can't do any of that until you have a starting place. And to me, a really good starting place is that mutual action plan where you can quickly understand what both sides are doing or not doing, more importantly.